This is the month of being Marbin B'Simcha. And anybody who knows me knows that one of my most simchadik things to do is to teach at Midreshet Rachel. And every time I walk out, I feel like really, really good, and I'm smiling, and I'm feeling great about it. And I've loved teaching there, and I still do. I still do get to go. And every time I do, it just gives me a tremendous lift. So I want to talk a little bit about Simcha, because this is the month of Simcha. Now, what does Simcha mean? All right, let's start with something else. The Vilna Gaon was once asked, what is the hardest mitzvah? Okay, so there are many, many mitzvot he could have chosen from. He said the hardest mitzvah is the mitzvah of Samachta b'chagecha, where you have to be happy, or you have to be b'simcha for 7 days in Tishrei over Sukkot. He says that's the hardest mitzvah, to keep up, to maintain a spirit of simcha for 7 days. So, you think, well, that doesn't sound hard. What about kibbud avim? That sounds a lot harder, but evidently not. And I think that's an important thing. Before, we sing it, mitzvah gedola liot b'simcha tamid. Question then also was, what does simcha mean? Also, we say, misha nichnas adar marbim b'simcha. In other words, when we get into to Adar, we increase simcha. And at the other end, we say, misha nichnas av mima'atim b'simcha. We lower simcha. But what does it mean? It means like simcha is always there. The fallback is simcha. And in Adar, we just kind of increase it. In Av, we decrease it, but there's always simcha. So there's something about simcha that's very, very important. And how do we do it? Okay, so one of the greatest elements of simcha is resolving doubt and finding purpose. Rav Tursky, Zecher Tzadik Livracha, who just passed away a short time ago and wrote so very many books, said that he wrote a book about simcha. He says, we think of simcha as being, la-di-da, and oh boy, am I happy. And he said, that's not what it means at all. And he gave 12 different ideas about simcha. But one of the ones is to have a purpose. And it's interesting how that connects to Purim itself and the Purim story. Esther, all right? I taught Megillat Esther a bunch of years. Did either of you take the Megillah with me, Megillat Esther? I taught Chamesh Megillot for a bunch of years. Oh. And one of the things I said is most of us don't know the time frame. When you read it in shul, it takes an hour, 45 minutes, and you think like it happened in a short amount of time. Actually, it takes over 9 years. The Megillah starts in the 3rd year of Achashverosh's reign and ends in the 12th. In the 3rd year, Esther in the 7th year, she becomes queen. So that means he was looking for a queen for 4 years. The end of the story is in the 12th year, which means that Esther sat in the harem of the king for 5 years, probably wondering, what am I doing here? What is the purpose for me being here, right? And then at the end of 5 years, she found out. And even though her fate is a fairly sad one, she's stuck with Achashverosh for the rest of her life. It isn't the love of her life, no matter what, we try to say. But she had purpose. And in fact, Mordechai says that. When she says, I don't think I can go, he says, why do you think Hashem made you queen? This could be the reason. For 5 years, you've been wondering. So Esther gets an understanding of purpose in her life, and that is a level of simcha. And simcha, again, doesn't mean dancing for joy, but she does get a sense of purpose. A little bit, I think that's what's been happening in the last year. We have been super focused. We've had to slow down on many things and been almost forced to look at so many things about our lives and to look questioningly at things that we took for granted. One of my chapters in my book is called Pay Attention. And I say, I'm not going to tell you what to pay attention to, because I don't know. The rabbi said, I don't say why this happened. How do I know what this happened, why this happened? And it may have happened to you for a different reason that it happened to me. There may have been world messages. I don't know what it is. Everybody has their own idea. We're mistreating the ecology. We were too materialistic. Everybody had their pet story. But you know what? We don't know who's right. But there's no question that we've been told to pay attention. And I think one of the things that I think the book is, and we'll talk, obviously now we'll start talking about it, is it was a lens. It offers a lens in which to look at an experience that is universal. It's not just us, it's everybody on the globe. It's hard to imagine any event that's ever been, that's been this universal. And therefore, we could use some help. And many of us look for help. We listen to shiurim and we've asked questions and like, why, what's going on? What are we supposed to learn from this? If you remember, there was a song in the very beginning by Yishai Ribo saying, what do you want? What are you telling us, God? You're obviously yelling. And what is it? So with that, we'll start. You can see, by the way, the book is over my shoulder. What side? One over there. No, there it is.
Right.
Yeah. Anyway, you'll get a chance to see the cover a little bit better. But that's about the book. And so, Rabbi,
yeah, I have questions I'd like to ask you.
Okay.
So, I found the book personally very engaging. And it seemed to me that you've been writing for many years from when I read the book, even though I only know you as a teacher. So have you written before? Have you done any real writing before?
No, and that's what really was shocking for me, because I don't write. In fact, I have a blog and I have a website now, and I'll tell you about that later. And I write that I still don't consider myself an author, even though technically I am. I consider myself a teacher who writes because I've never really written. And I never kept up a diary when I was a kid. I'd write in my diary for like 5 days and then give it up. And that's what was really very surprising for me. I never thought I was a writer. In fact, I'll read you from the prologue because it says exactly that. I never started out to write a book. It would never have entered my mind. Since early childhood, I've been a bibliophile. People like me read books, enjoyed them, could be engrossed in them. However, we didn't write them. Then one day in March, shortly after the holiday of Purim, by the way, it's coming on a year, I wrote my very first letter the week after Purim, and we're almost there. One day in March, I looked out my Jerusalem window and beheld a strange new world. No one was on the streets. There were no sounds of traffic. We heard that schools, restaurants, theaters, stores, nearly everything were closed or closing. We knew of people who were sick. And then a close friend died of COVID-19 shortly before Passover. Where was I? I didn't recognize my beloved city, country, or world anymore. I was so terribly disoriented, and I wrote a letter from the new and alien world in which I was presently living. I named it Planet Corona and shared it with a few friends via email. And that's really how it started. I couldn't teach. I write that in the first letter, that my favorite thing to do is teach, but that was closed. Schools were closed. And yet there were things I wanted to share. So I wrote it as an email. And I even wrote in the very beginning, I'm not a writer. And then people said, you really are.
You're right.
And what was funny was in the first month, I turned out 3 or 4 800 word or more pieces a week.
Wow.
Shockingly. And no one was more shocked than me.
Mm-hmm. So I want to tell you, because we're sort of in, Esther and I are in the same position in a sense. We don't have any kids at home, right? And you also, you and your husband are at home, right? Is that what made you begin writing letters? Because you had time to think about it? Because you didn't have to deal with the kids and right?
I haven't been dealing with kids for a long time.
I know.
So if I was going to write, there were other opportunities, but you're right. Obviously, especially in the very beginning, in the first lockdown, which people took seriously, unlike some of the subsequent ones,
right.
I was home a lot. And this was all new and it was shocking. And I was very disoriented, and I wrote that. I felt lost. I looked out in a world that I didn't recognize. And that's why I called it Planet Corona. By the way, I've realized since then that one of the reasons for calling it Planet Corona was because then you can leave Planet Corona. You understand? Right. If I had to admit that this was Planet Earth, I'm stuck with it. Correct. If I'm Planet Corona, one day we'll be out of Planet Corona. And in the beginning, I don't know how many of you remember this, we thought that was going to be pretty soon. In fact, I have a chapter called Exit Strategy, and it's from April. It was called Exit Strategy Part 1, written on April the 1st. That's 2 weeks after I wrote my first letter. And now you'll remember, by the way, that's what one of the things about the book. We lived this together. It's going to remind you also, when you read it, I hope, of the stages we went through. Do you remember when everybody was certain it was going to end right after Pesach? And everybody had gematrias that proved that it was going to end right after Pesach. And then, oh no, it's going to end in the summer, because we know, what did they know? They knew, oh, this virus is very sensitive to heat. So it's not going to last in the summer. Well, we learn very differently. And all of these things, when you read them, it'll remind you. But I felt right in the beginning, look, in my very first letter, I write, what I believe the coronavirus has stripped away are many of our illusions that we are in control, that science and medicine are so advanced that they somehow can deal with anything. Societal illusions about the inviolability and limitless of our individual desires and aspirations. And I said, this has always been true. Right now, it's being revealed to us. And that I felt right away. I felt that we were getting a message. It's very interesting. I'm going to get it right now. 1 second. You're aware that we lost very, unfortunately, and I mentioned it was a very close friend who died before Pesach. I think he was number 70 of the people who died, and he was a good friend. And we also lost Nebuch, Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, and that was also a tremendous loss. He writes something very beautiful in the introduction to this book, which came out, that was his last, I think next to the last book that came out. He says, for me, the most personally transformative of all beliefs has been the idea of hashgacha pratit, divine providence. Whenever something unexpected has happened in my life, I have always asked, what is heaven trying to tell me? How does it want me to respond? Given that this has happened, how shall I turn this moment into a blessing? He explains that he learned that from the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He was very much influenced by the Lubavitcher Rebbe when he was very young. Uh-huh. And also by the works of Viktor Frankl. I'm sure you've heard of Viktor Frankl, who was the founder of logotherapy and positive therapy. And he wrote a book. He was a Holocaust survivor who learned a lot and got a lot from his experience. And he wrote a book called Man's Search for Meaning. It's very important for me, and I think for many of us, to feel that the world and life has meaning. And that's what I've been trying. What is the meaning? Or not what is the meaning? What are the meanings that I can get out of this? And a lot of that is what is in the book. It's not preachy. I'm glad the rabbi said that. It's not even depressing. There's a lot of humor in it. Right. But let's try to understand, let's focus in on things. One of my first ones is called Little Things Mean a Lot. Because when you were stuck in the house, all of a sudden little things became very important. I talk about the pixels on my computer that are now showing me people's faces.
Right. I'll tell you, when you mentioned Ministry of Planet Corona, right? I thought two different things. I thought Harry Potter. I that's what came to mind. I know I didn't really read Harry Potter, but all my family did, and they saw the movies as well.
I did.
Oh, you did? So I thought maybe it came that, but it also sounded a little bit. This is going to certainly tell you about my age. It sounded a little bit like the Twilight Zone.
Oh my gosh.
Like
Look,
Planet Corona, because in the Twilight Zone, they deal with a lot of different planets at different times. And,
so,
you know, there's giants there and little people. And it's like.
So the idea of going to the ministry, actually, what I was thinking about was bureaucracy, including Israeli bureaucracy. When you used to go to the Misrad Abriyut or the Misrad Apnim, Misrad means ministry, really, or the office of, or the ministry of. So I was thinking about that because of all of the red tape. And since I was on a planet, so I had a lot of fun with the idea of being on a planet. I did play around with it, but really, I was describing just what we're seeing. Everything is really about what we were experiencing. But making it humorous helped a lot. One of the things that I made a point of, and I'm going to show it to you. First of all, since you mentioned the ministry, I'll share screen with something so you could see something that I kind of had fun with. Okay. The rabbi asked me before, you're going to ask me, and one of the questions has to do with the buttons. These are two buttons that I've made up that I was wearing. They're introduced in the chapters about going to the ministry. The one over here is one of my earlier visits to the ministry. I go to the ministry of entertainment, of arts and leisure, of visa. There's about 5 or 6 chapters about visiting the ministry. And in one of them, the people are walking around with these buttons that say DBA, WDK. And looks, as I'm very curious what it means. So I stopped one of the people walking around, scurrying around like they do in offices. And I said, what does the button stand for? He says, oh, it stands for don't bother asking. We don't know. And I thought, okay. And a lot of people who've been reading my things thought that was adorable. They were even saying, where can you buy such buttons? I was even thinking it for a time to make it. In a later one, they're walking around with both buttons. So again, I get somebody else to ask, what does the second one say? BTOWND. It stands for, but that's okay. We never did. And it's a little bit about being in Israel, how everybody always feels they have to answer a question. But basically, there's, of course, as a tongue-in-cheek humor. We think we know so much, especially in the beginning. And again, this is something I emphasize in the book. We thought science knows everything. We thought medicine could take care of everything. We thought our leaders, our rabbis, and everything this year showed up as we don't know much. We don't know anything. Nothing is definite. Not people's lives, not people's parnassa, not your children's education, not your travel plans, nothing. And in fact, one of the chapters that I liked very much was called The Gift of Present. It starts out here. When you get to Planet Corona, this is a very early one. This is like a week later. When you get to Planet Corona, the first thing they do is give you a gift. Isn't that just lovely? Actually, they call it a present. In fact, that's just what it is, the present. Now, and you begin to learn what an exceptionally generous gift it is. Perhaps the best one you or anyone else has ever received. Because here on planet Corona, no one, and I mean no one, seems to really know how we got here and arrived at this exact position. So we have no past, at least none that we can make anything of. And no one, and I really mean no one, has any idea where we are going from here. So we don't seem to have a future either, at least not one we can anticipate. In place of the past, we have conjectures and theories. As for the future, it's mostly at the crystal ball stage. So what we have is now. Only that's all you have ever had. The past, whatever happened, is over and done with. The future isn't here yet. We're left with this moment, whomever we're with, wherever we are, whatever we're doing. However, most of us are unused to living that way. Now, that was written a week later, a week after I started, but I began to realize that because we weren't going anywhere, the present, and by the way, you mentioned Rabbi Shlomo Volba, Rabbi, one of the things that he writes is that most people don't live in the present, and misery comes from there. There have been studies that showed that most people live 50% of the time in the past or in the future, agonizing over what was and worrying about what's going to be. And in fact, it was shown by studies that is, and this is something I also mentioned in my book, it is a source for unhappiness. Living in the present, even if the present isn't all that great, is actually something that makes people happier. So I'm going to get out of this particular share screen right now. So we need to live in the present. And again, that's another thing that I wrote. I got some very nice comments. In fact, Rabbi Breitowitz wrote it's a long letter in the front, but on the front cover, it says, Chaya Passow's optimism and resilience are truly contagious. And this type of contagion can only be positive. You know, we've been talking about contagion the whole year. And we felt that this could be something that could be helpful. By the way, one of the nicest and one of the best things that's come out of the book are the people who write to me and say, thank you. One person said, your writing was cathartic. Somebody said, wasn't the writing therapeutic? 100%. I mean, one person in the chat, I think it was Rivka, asked, wasn't it therapeutic? Of course it was therapeutic. That's how it started. I needed this. In fact, this is the book. Somebody once wrote, I wrote the book I needed to read. This is absolutely true for me. This is the book I needed to read. And in fact, my husband sometimes when I'm a little bit gloomy will say, go read your book. You wrote about that. Go read it. I did it for myself, but it turned out that other people enjoyed it and people got things out of it. I had somebody from Midreshet Rachel who said, you know, I had a Shabbat in Bidud and reading your book really helped me get through it. And somebody said it was cathartic. Other people said, you said what I was thinking. That's what I want. As I said, and the rabbi understands this, I'm a teacher at heart. And I teach because I love to share. And I share because it makes me feel good. And sharing with the book that's what it's done. So Sarah Shapiro, I'm sure most of you have heard of her. She's written about 13 or 14 books. She said, I love this one. So, and that's why, well, I'll tell you why I'm reading it. Just as a visual artist opens our eyes to beauty and pattern in the world that surrounds us, Chaya Passow creates a frame around our seemingly incomprehensible present era. For those of us who are still living inside the strange plague of the year 2020, and for those who will one day look back and wonder, her words give form to the formless and endow mystery with meaning. That's very highfalutin. But I do think, first of all, we're all waiting to look back already. Right. You know, when I wrote in the beginning, you know, no one would have guessed, no one in a million years would
Right.
think that a year later, we're still confused. We're still in the crystal ball stage. In fact, one of my early ones, I think in May, maybe, I talked about many people who think that we're finished already. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah.
And I said, they think they're seeing the light at the end of the tunnel. And I said, I just hope it's not the light of an oncoming train.
Right. 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 So look, I mean, there's no question that, one of the reactions that I got when I tell people about the book is, look, Rabbi Shuren, I'm dealing with Corona all the time. And the answer is Chaya Passow's book, because it feels like I don't want to pick it up because it's dealing with Corona, but it's really dealing with life. And
Right.
when you start to read it, like you said, you get the therapy, you get the catharsis, you feel, you know what, this woman really understands what's going on. She understands what I'm going through, and it really makes you feel good. But they see the word Corona, they get like really nervous. And I always said, no, pick it up for 1 or 2 chapters. You'll see. It's not, yeah.
No, I thank you. And I want to share one more screen because this is a little bit to do with that. Okay. My book is about coping. Really, ultimately, it was my own coping. It was my own coping mechanism, which I shared with other people and helped them cope. Because what Rabbi Sherman just said is so true. This is not just about Corona. In fact, if we can learn skills from this, it'll help us through life. Because there are crises, there are difficult things. So these are things that I think my book did and that I want to share with you. Coping strategies, hunt for the humor. There's often humor in things. There's humor in my book. I do try to make fun, and there's satire in it. I try to put a humorous turn on some of the things because I don't want this to be glum, because I didn't want to be glum. I put the humor in because I needed the humor. So there's humor in the book, but there's humor in life. And as we said, here it is Purim, unwrap the gift. There's gifts in things. Every challenge has a gift. I really believe that whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger. What Rabbi Sachs said, when Hashem sends something your way, the question you should ask is, what do I do with this? How do I turn it into a bracha? Tap into inner sources like creativity. Now, for me, I never thought I was an author. I never thought I was a writer. If anybody would have told me a year ago that I would produce a book in the following year, I would have said, you're crazy. And I would have believed it. I never, ever, ever, ever would have guessed it. But there evidently was something inside me that I wasn't aware of that was coming out. In fact, in the very beginning, I really felt as if I were channeling the letters. Now that's a little bit woo, 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 you're talking about the Twilight Zone. That sounds a little Twilight Zone-ish, but I really did, because the words just came. They came easily. If they hadn't been easily done, I never would have written. I would never have been able to write 70 letters. So, but other people I have found have done beautiful projects. Some people have taken up things that they never took up before. Creativity makes you feel good. And whatever inner resources, maybe there's resilience you didn't know you had. I would say that many of us, if we had been told a year ago that we would go through this year and survive, we would have said, no way. And yet here we are. Stay in touch. That's one of the things I did. In the beginning, when I couldn't see people, I wrote. And then I discovered Zoom. And I found that I can stay in touch. We need people. Everybody needs people. Recognize that you're not alone. That's something that the book did for me and for others. Because when I say certain things that I'm going through and somebody else says, oh my gosh, that's how you felt, that's how I felt, it makes you feel better. And you recognize that you're not alone. Everybody's going through this. There's nobody who hasn't been touched. Let go and let God. Oh my gosh, that is so hard. But basically, that is what God has been saying. Let go. And he's been prying our fingers off of the things we clutch We clutched science and knowledge and control. We clutched all of these things, and Hashem pried over in our fingers, and he says, don't clutch those things. That's not the answer. Only I am the answer. Only I know. And it's not easy, but I've really thought a lot about that. Feel your feelings, but don't indulge. There are parts in the book where I do feel my feelings. And I talk about being fed up and disgusted. There's one called Too Much. And sometimes it's just too much. April 2nd, I wrote this. And with all the understanding and lessons that we are deriving from our sojourn on planet Corona, and with all the coping mechanisms and humorous or informative videos and emails we're receiving endlessly, and with all of that, we're still on a strange and mystifying and often frightening planet. And it's unlike anything that even the most senior among us can recall. And we don't know when it will end. And we want to cry out even before we get to the Seder, Dayenu, get me out of here. Again, I wrote this before the Seder because, and several times afterwards, it's hard. I mean, but we got to do this. We're doing it. We have no choice. There's a thing that I really liked. Also, I saw this, by the way, and I write about it several times, as being kind of universal timeout. I'm sure that many of us can relate to that. Before I go on to, all right, let me finish with these first. Drop judgmentalism. In other words, feel your feelings, but don't indulge. Don't get depressed if you can avoid it. Try to bring yourself out of bad feelings. In other words, but feel your feelings, be honest about it, and also honest with other people's feelings. Not everybody agrees with you. There's one person I quoted who was disgusted with people like me who are trying to bring meaning into this. It was an Israeli, and she wrote and says, I don't want to hear about it. There is no meaning. Just leave me alone. And I understood, because you know what? Like Rabbi Shurin said, we've got it fairly easy. No kids to worry about schooling, not, let fewer problems of parnasa, a lot of things like that. But we have to understand the feelings of people who have it much more difficult. Drop judgmentalism. You know how many times read the newspapers? It's their fault. They're not doing it right. He's not doing it right. She's not doing it right. One woman in one of these Zooms said, I can't get over the fact that so many people are doing all the wrong things, and it gets me so angry. And I said, does it help you? She says, no. I said, so then drop it. They're not asking your opinion. If they did, you can give it. But just to be angry at them. And then remember, you're not walking around in their shoes. Heave ho to hubris. That was it. The modern world was certain that we were on top of everything. Oh, with the World Wide Web and the knowledge and the science. You know how many times this has happened? The patent office in the United States, 100 years ago, there was a guy who worked for it and thought that the patent office was going to close because everything that could be invented had already been invented. 100 years ago. Physicists, 100 years ago, thought that everything that was ever to be discussed in the field of physics was discovered. And then there was an explosion, literally an explosion of things. We are full of hubris. The Torah tells us about it. Give it up, folks. We have value because God gives us value. Appreciate, appreciate, appreciate. Just like in real estate, it's location, location, location. Appreciate, appreciate, appreciate. We have so much. I'm stuck in my house, but with a full refrigerator, with heat. Luckily, I also have a husband, so I'm not alone, and there are people who are. Be grateful, folks. Every morning when we say Birchot HaShachar, and that's also in my book, I go over the Birchot HaShachar. It's called Reality Check. Anyway, I wanted to read this about the timeout. One of these days we're going to get out of here, right? Have we done inner work to try to understand why we are in this universal timeout? Are we asking ourselves what we need to work on individually and within society so that the world that we rebuild after our sojourn on planet Corona is a better one than the one we left behind? In the cartoon Calvin and Hobbes, Calvin is a precocious but often obnoxious 6-year-old who hates going to school. His defiant cry is, "You can make me go to school, but you can't make me learn anything." We've been sent to planet Corona for a timeout that has cost many billions of dollars, while the cost in human life and pain is incalculable. Wouldn't it be a horrific and shameful waste of time, money, and humanity if we refuse to learn something while we're here? If we take advantage of all the benefits to be gained from this very expensive education we are receiving at Corona University, perhaps we can emerge wiser, better, and more loving citizens of our old home when we return. May it be soon. In the beginning of April, folks, we've gotten much more time to think about it. The timeout has lasted a lot longer than any of us can have imagined.
I just want to add something because I found with my own grandchildren that, 8-year-old, 3-year-old, they began to appreciate school like they never did before. One of my grandchildren, after the second lockdown, the next morning he was going to go to school. He had his backpack on at 3:00 in the morning. Okay, this is how he appreciated school. So it was very good the way you said that you could send me to school, but you can't make me learn. These kids are dying to go to school.
It's so funny you say that. I was just in Ramat Beit Shemesh visiting my kids, and my granddaughter, who's in the 4th grade, and she made Aliyah. This is a crazy story. My son and his family with 5 kids, now 6. He has a Sabarit who was born 3 months ago. Came on Aliyah 6 months before the Corona. So
Wow.
the most of their time here on Aliyah has been with Corona. She's with a big smile. She says, "I love school," because she went back today. "I love school. It's so much better than being on the phone."
Right, you see?
I looked at her. I said,
even
"Terrific."
The littlest kid starts appreciating. I just want to
I'm appreciating this. I love seeing faces. I'm so grateful that I can. Olivia, I wouldn't see you. You're in Passaic. So at least I get to see you. By the way, I have now Zoom meetings with people, with friends that I've had for many years. Some are in the States. There's a friend in Paris that I'm Zooming with.
Wow.
So there are things. There are things. You just have to look for them and not stew in our unhappiness. Look, I could go on forever about the book. I enjoyed writing it. A lot of people have enjoyed reading it. I want to do 2 or maybe 3 things. First of all, because
can you answer one question?
Sure.
Because I'm always curious as to when did the letters, what was that moment that the letters became a book?
Okay. So when I'd written about 25 letters, so like a little bit after Pesach, some people started saying, "You got to write a book. You got to publish this. You got to publish this." First, I looked into the possibility of magazines. Maybe somebody would be interested. But my first thing was, nobody's going to publish this. Don't be ridiculous. In fact, one guy who was in publishing, I actually sent him a few of the letters because I knew he was in publishing. It was in May. He said, "Listen, it's almost over and nobody's going to be interested in reading about this." This was in May. So I think he's eating his words by now. But at any rate, people started saying, "Read it." Started saying, "Publish it." And my attitude was, you got to be nuts. Little by little, a few people were very, very insistent. And I did look into publishing. My husband, who you can see over there, was terrific always and really wanted me to publish it also. And I did. And it was a shock to me when I held the book in my hand. Funny, I found that the book came out while I was teaching in Midreshet Rachel. And I went to everybody, "It's out." It was on Amazon before it was printed here in Israel. And I was so excited. It's still a surprise to me. I'm delighted. I am delighted. But the thing that delights me the most is when I get the positive feedback. Let me just show you. So I want to share screen just a little bit. Okay, so first of all, that's the cover. We had a great cover designer. She actually lives in Ramat Beit Shemesh, and she did a great job. For anybody who's interested, if you want to know how to get a book in Israel, by the way, Jody, if you're interested, there are books in Beit Shemesh. You can be delivered to your door. You can either go to the website that is specifically about the book, planetcorona18@gmail.com. You can call me at this number, 02-563-9128. I also have a website now, which will also help you to get to me, www.lettersfromplanetcorona.com. And in the US, you can order the book on Amazon. You can order it in Amazon from Israel also, but they charge you for delivery as much as the book costs. So it isn't worthwhile. It isn't in bookstores yet. I hope it will be, because the bookstores haven't been open since it came out. By the way, what you might like about the website is I never thought I was a writer, but it turned out that once you are, you don't stop. So I've written about 18 letters or pieces even after I left Planet Corona. And those are all on my website. So if you want to read some of the things I've written since then, some of them have been featured as blogs on the Times of Israel. And some of them are just, I'm still sending them out. I'm still sending them out to the people who've been getting it all along. But you can also read them there. And there's a little bit about me and, all that stuff. I didn't want this to be about me. It isn't. It's about my sharing. It's about teaching. It's about reaching out to people.